You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, your superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the cinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Season 2, Episode 10, Bane. Bane. Oh, sorry. Wrong one. What do you see the man before throwing him into the brain? Was that the right one? Did I get it?
No, none of these are right. None of these are right. Well, the closest one to right is of course Tom Hardy, but
Yes.
But also only because I love him in spite of the rest of the movie. But we'll talk. You know what? Tom Hardy is a good example of one of the problems with Bane that crops up in this episode. But let's not jump ahead too far.
Well, no, because we've got to talk about this title card, Joshua, because this title card's freaking amazing. I
love it.
I love the airbrush look. I love the silhouette. It's intimidating. If you don't know who Bane is, it's a huge mystery. I think this is a grade A title card.
It is a mystery if you don't know. And it's also... Bane strikes a really obvious silhouette if you know who Bane is. And if you don't, then you're going to be like, what are the tubes? What are the hoses? And a thing that you and I have been talking about for the last couple of episodes is how we kind of discovered or rediscovered that this is a liminal space between Batman the Animated Series and Justice League. Right? Like they keep escalating things. We've had some mystical threats. We've had a little more super science than we're used to. And what I love most about this title card is that you have a hulking figure who has obviously punched his way through this brick wall.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Oh,
and
huge.
I mean, Croc is very strong. We've dealt with the fact that Croc is stronger than the average person, that he's tougher than the average person, but Croc does not punch his way through walls, right?
No, this figure is clearly larger than Killer Croc, who Killer Croc is already somewhat kind of heightened reality anyway.
Right.
And this guy
yeah.
and Bane takes it a whole nother step further.
Right. It's like BTAS is turned up to 7 and Croc is turned up to about 8. And then with Bane, we actually turn it up to 10. Like we're and I think they knew what they were doing with that also. Like they knew, the creators of the show knew that they were going to have to show that this was like a reset higher, because what the first thing we see Bane really do is physically overcome Croc.
Yes. Well, yeah. I think that's a great point. They use Killer Croc as kind of a litmus test or something. Be like, hey, here's the high bar now. Croc is the biggest baddie in Batman's Rogues Gallery you've seen on the show so far, who's not somehow supernatural anyway. And here's Bane crushing him, humiliating him.
Our physically most impressive character gets taken out in a second by this new threat. That is really rock solid storytelling. I really like it. I mean, from a comic book perspective, there is a bit of a thing where some creators will do this with characters that don't really deserve it. Like the day that Gambit showed up and beat Wolverine in a fight was supposed to show that Gambit's really cool, but most of us just went, really though? And the same thing happens to Batman a lot on the DC side. We'll talk about it a lot in Justice League, that they really kind of make Superman very weak in order to show how dangerous the threats are. In BTAS, though, it works really well because we have kept such a lid on this with Croc. Like, Croc is the upper limit and will never go anywhere near it, and then Bane just blasts through the barrier, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I think so. And again, kind of following that idea that we've been talking about, that there's slow baby steps into a heightened reality. I think this really does kind of come to a nearly a climax, because we're about halfway through season 2 or so of Batman the Animated Series, and we've about reached the point where they're going to start transitioning to actual superpowered beings, and this is about as far as we can go on that before we reach that level.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you also see it. I said that was the first time we see Bane actually do anything, and I stand by that. But I think that this escalation of the weirdness as well as the threat begins with our introduction of Bane. Like, he's humongous. He is in a business suit, but also his luchador mask.
Right. Well,
and has a suitcase that the mugs can't pick up.
Well, and he's from another country, and I'm not saying that to say, oh my gosh, someone from another country coming to Gotham. It's more that I think he's very well presented as a foreign threat that Batman has not yet encountered. He sounds different than any of Batman's foes. He looks different than any of Batman's foes. He's clearly larger than life and just represents such a different type of enemy that we've ever seen before. Because the other thing is, he's not just a big lug. Clearly, he's very articulate. He's already talking about strategically what his plan is to move into Gotham. So he's not just a muscle or someone there to throw some punches. This is clearly a formidable and intellectually formidable foe as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth saying that Bane is no dummy, right? But the last time that we had a threat from outside of Gotham with an accent show up, it was Ra's,
right?
Who is sort of the opposite number 2 Batman as far as, detective, knowing things, the tactical thinking. And then we flip that around with Bane, who is oh no, I mean, I'm not dumb, but really I'm here to break him.
Right. Well, and that's a big difference between Ra's al Ghul and, Bane. Bane, I think, sees Batman as a fun challenge.
Yes,
versus,
absolutely.
Ra's al Ghul, I think, is more. I mean, he's kind of he Batman actually fits into his scheme rather than than being an opponent. He's another pawn, I guess you would say. So yeah, I think that's a good distinction there. And that's another season 3 character we saw earlier this year.
Now, what's kind of interesting to me is that if you are familiar with luchador fiction, which I am no expert, but it's, a bunch of masked guys in tights who throw each other off of things and then go on globetrotting adventures in the movies. So I've seen a couple, right? I really appreciate how hard they go for Bane as luchador in the fact that he's traveling in a business suit with his luchador mask, because that is absolutely. Have you ever? You're the film guy, but this is a kind of a deep genre cut. Are you familiar with luchador films?
So you're talking about luchador movies where luchadors are either kind of like a superhero or a spy of some sort,
that's usually the space they fit in. Yes, the superhero spy. Yeah,
I can't say I'm well cited in this very deep cut genre, but I am familiar. I believe I've seen 1 or 2 of these in my day.
Just the visual, though, right?
Yes,
Just the visual. Mm-hmm. I mean. It's usually the hero. Usually the hero of the piece who is the guy in a mask, but also in a business suit, introducing himself as El Santo, while he's fighting crime. And it's like, we all know you've got the mask. It's just, it's a fantastic little
Joshua,
superhero. Yes.
I just had the realization of where I know this concept from.
Oh, do tell.
Oh my God. And this might be one that listeners of the show are listeners of this show, but also people who stuck with the entire DCAU and watched, I think it was at Fox Kids. There was a show called Los Luchadores.
Oh, that's right.
That came on, I think, Fox Kids in the early 2000s, where, yes, the luchador was the superhero. And it was kind of like Power Rangers starring luchadors.
Yes, I forgot that thing existed. You're absolutely right. Wow. I need to see if I can find that anywhere, honestly. There's your bonus media suggestion. Because even if it's not still good, right? Like, even if it doesn't hold up, the idea that there are hundreds of live action films devoted to these heroes of Mexican wrestling flying around on airplanes in business suits and their luchador masks to fight international cartels.
Yes.
It's fantastic. And so right away you're getting kind of all kinds of inversions, I think, with Bane's introduction, right? Like, he's physically outmatching Batman, but he's also not stupid. He's clearly got Candace's attention. Hey, by the way, welcome back, Candace and Rupert Thorne. And if you know anything about luchadors, he's looks like a good guy but acts like a bad guy. It's pretty great.
Yeah, well, and I'm actually glad you brought up Candace and Rupert Thorne. I really love that some of these supporting characters always seem to make their comeback. It's like Hamilton Hill and certain subplots is always coming back. And here we have Rupert Thorne playing kind of the cartel sort of role, right? Like
yeah,
of Bane.
Absolutely. I mean, he's the real money behind this thing. Like Batman has ruined his business to the point where he's like, okay, I'm not going to rely on my own button men because they clearly can't get the job done. And what am I going to do? Hire the Joker? What am I, an idiot?
Yeah,
no.
Right. He's going international.
Let's hire
He's going
international. Yeah. And it's actually a really good plan and not wildly dissimilar from how Bane was introduced in the comics.
Actually, Joshua, I have some notes here about Bane, who's appeared in all sorts of alternate media. I mean, as in everyone you can imagine. But I really want to.
He really has shockingly been all over the place, considering how he got started.
Well, he's actually relatively recent. But please do tell, how did he get started?
Well, I mean, very similar to this episode, just with more of a payoff, which we will talk about, because I feel like Bane never gets to be as large a threat in other media as he is in the comic books, or at least how he was originally. So it's very similar to this episode, actually. Bane shows up in Gotham knowing that Batman is the guy to beat, right? And we have talked about this so many times, but Bane is a perfect example of that opposite number. He is one of the many evil Batmen, just emphasizing the physicality over everything else.
Right. I think that's a great point, because as we've talked about, like with any number of the best villains in Batman's rogues gallery, that they also often reflect a certain aspect of Batman, just kind of taken to the negative extreme or the evil extreme. And Bane,
yeah, you just turn it a little bit, right? You just turn it a little bit.
Right.
And obviously Batman must be a fantastic physical specimen to do what he does. It must happen.
Yes.
And what happens when you go way too far with that? And the answer is you have Bane. Because he was, just like they say in this episode, he was an experiment done in a prison. And this has been done a few different ways, but this is one of the ways he's the opposite number of Batman. The Wrath has a different one of these. Prometheus has a different one of these. But Batman was created by crime, right? And so was Bane. He was in prison in utero. And because this is a backwards, terrible country, his mother in prison gives birth to him. He serves out her sentence along with her. And so he grows up in the prison and just becomes, he has to, right? Become the toughest thing in the world just to survive. And then he volunteers for the Venom project and gets pumped up with Venom, which again is also very like Batman, but a little too far. Like you see Batman use tools and he learns super kung fu and all that stuff, but he never alters himself, in that way, let alone something very addictive.
We'll see. It's because, Joshua, here's what you're not saying. It's that Bane was actually a great opportunity for DC to create a villain meant to actually launch a Just Say No to Drugs campaign to kids in the 90s.
Okay. I wish that was why he was created.
Well, I do feel, and that can be my imagination. No, it's not my imagination. This is something we'll get to one day when we're talking about Batman Beyond. But they do use the Venom as an analogy or parallel for drug addictions.
It totally is.
Steroids, of course. And I want to say, it was The Winning Edge. I think it's in Batman Beyond, where it's specifically using the Bane Venom to draw parallels between, oh man, you get all pumped up with this stuff, it makes you feel good and strong.
Yeah.
And then the consequences, though, is it destroys your body over time when you can't get enough of it. But I don't know if that, I'm sure, that's not the intention, but I do find it interesting that it would be created in Bane would be a character that emerges from the 90s, which is when you see the emergence of, DARE programs in schools and a huge push against using needles via, a lot of the HIV outbreak and things of that nature.
Yeah. No, you do get there eventually. There's a story called Venom where Batman feels that he must give himself the edge and he uses Venom. And Venom is instantly addictive. Like it's instantaneous. You are addicted to it. And so there are sort of parallel stories going on in Venom where both Bane and Batman are trying to kick the habit. That's way later, though. Because in 1993, Bane was literally introduced to break Bruce Wayne's back and make him not Batman anymore.
So what you're saying is this was a kind of an event comic in the same way.
Before there were such things.
Right.
Yes.
So before we had like Marvel Civil Wars, or I guess we did have the Infinite Crisis, or, we had things like that.
You had crises and Secret Wars, like a couple of different styles of crisis at DC and a couple of different Secret Wars at Marvel, but nothing like what you see now where it's literally written event to event to event. And this was also, even from that perspective, very contained. It was only a Batman problem.
Gotcha. So this was so it didn't involve a huge crossover of Batman's allies from the rest of the DC universe, but it did. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Nightfall did feature the use of almost every villain in Batman's rogues galleries, correct? Because the idea was that Bane would wear Batman down before he fought him.
Yes, that's a beautiful. This again shows that thinking. What's Bane's big picture plan, And yeah, the very first thing that he does is stage a massive breakout from Arkham so that Batman has to run himself into the ground, catching all of his villains at once. And only when Batman is worn down to the nub, he's exhausted, he's physically already, he has been, beat up, stabbed, he's not sleeping. It's been weeks that he has just nonstop been chasing these villains. That's when Bane shows up for the big final confrontation, which I think is kind of a great beat that is missing from this episode.
Well, because as you put it, they couldn't do that in this episode, right? They couldn't break the bat, although they get really close to evoking that imagery in the episode.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the most famous Bane image. So, of course, they show it, but there's no way that they're going to actually get to do it. And again, just because I'm the comic book guy, I feel like this is a Bane episode. I'm going to talk a lot. So, but this is my stuff. I was buying this stuff off of the grocery store spinner racks when it was coming out. I was following Nightfall and was equally horrified as everyone else most everyone else who was reading it. So the whole point of Nightfall, 1993, Bane shows up and he breaks Bruce Wayne's back, and Bruce Wayne is paralyzed from the waist down. He can no longer operate as Batman. At this point, he and Dick Grayson are still very much estranged. It does not even occur to Bruce to ask Dick to take over for him as Batman, and instead he brings in another lesser known member of the Bat family, and a very adjunct member in Azrael.
Oh, yes, Azrael. I almost forgot. I always forget he's a thing.
Because he replaced Bruce Wayne as Batman for a long time. And if you're thinking that this sounds a little out of character, you are correct. Because the story going on behind the story is that Denny O'Neil, who I have mentioned before on this show, he wrote a lot of Batman stuff. He co-created Ra's al Ghul. By the 90s, he is the editor-in-chief of the Bat offices. This is how DC used to do it. You had a super office, you had a Bat office, you had a Justice League office, like these little fiefdoms. And what Denny said went. And basically, Denny he's on record. I've seen interviews with him where he just got tired of people telling him that Batman should just kill all of his enemies.
Right.
I mean, this is the early 90s, so we're coming off of a lot of Death Wish. We're coming off of like the introduction of the Punisher and everybody going, yeah, cool, murdering guys. That sounds heroic.
Oh, yeah.
And Denny said, we're going to show you a Batman that just murders his foes. We're going to give you what you want. And he will tell you that the goal of this was for everyone to realize that that is not actually what they wanted, but he also bit his nails throughout the first 2/3 of this thing because he was afraid it was going to backfire on him, and he would be like, I guess I was wrong. They do want the Batman that's a murderer.
Hey, Denny, buddy, pal, I hate to say that you were kind of wrong there, but hashtag release the Snyder Cut tells me that people did want to see Batman just straight up kill people, apparently.
Okay, that's the difference that 26 years makes. Okay, that is the difference that 26 years makes, because at the time, of course, there was a small group who were like, yes, this is what we've always wanted. But the vast majority of Batman fans said, no, thank you. Not only was it just bring Bruce Wayne back, but it was bring back a Batman that doesn't act like this. Because while they didn't let Azrael, or as we called him at the time, Asbats, we didn't let Asbats kill any of the big names. He was a friggin' scythe through the B and C list for a while in order to set up this dichotomy between he and Bruce Wayne. And without going any further down the Azrael trail, Bane was introduced in order to kick this off.
Okay.
Bane is the guy who showed up and broke the bat in order to kick off Nightfall.
Well, that's really interesting. The timing is strange because at this point, Batman the Animated Series is already on the air, if this is 1993. So this is a really interesting space that Batman the Animated Series occupies. So in the comics, Azrael is serving as Batman, but on television, we still have Bruce Wayne, and we're getting a lot of those classic, more classic Batman stories. What was, I mean, I'm just curious, do you have any, like, what was that like? Did you think it was some sort of like contradiction, or was it kind of strange?
So as a longtime comic book reader, that kind of thing has rarely bothered me, just because they're always different versions, right? Like, I was watching Super Friends as, a little younger than this, 8, 9, 10 years old. And the Batman that was in the comics was different than the one that was on Super Friends, Also, the 90s was a really complicated time for comics. Right. Largely they were garbage. Like, that's just not entirely. And everybody's going to at me with their exceptions. There were absolutely exceptions. But if you just do the mile high view of superhero comics throughout most of the 90s, they're trash. They look pretty. They're on glossy paper. They have a bunch of different covers, but they are bad.
Now, this is also when comic books were selling really well. Am I correct?
They were, but that was due to speculation. Like, speculation became a thing. People started thinking of collecting comic books as an investment.
Yes.
The problem is, oh my gosh, we are deep into the comic book stuff here, but it actually makes a lot of sense with this character because he is so just a moment in amber. But the problem with the idea of comic books as actual collector's items is that what you have in your mind for that are comic books from the 60s, like early Marvel stuff, when there was no direct market, like there weren't comic book shops. That did not exist.
Right.
Okay, so they were hard to come by. Or you have in mind things like original Captain America's and old Batman and Superman stuff, which is before the war. And the thing that I always want to point out with why comic books became so rare, why certain ones became rare, is because you would turn to the back of the comic book and there's Captain America or Superman or Batman telling you, the child reading it, to do your part for the war effort.
Oh, gosh.
And the first thing you could do as a kid was a paper drive. You are holding a piece of paper that is telling you to do a paper drive, and it goes in the pile.
Wow.
So most of them did not survive that time, right? Mm-hmm. You also had thousands of copies being shipped overseas to GIs so that GIs had something to read that was light and fun while they were on the battlefield. None of those made it home. How could they? They were tromping across France with them.
You're saying your great-great-grandfather didn't bring back a comic book with a bullet hole in it as a collector's item, Joshua? I mean, I know.
Oh, that would
be
too good. Yes. Too good a story. That would be too good a story. Too perfect for me. But yeah, so then this crops back up as an idea in the late 80s, largely because of Batman. Batman 89 hits, and that was preceded not long before that was Dark Knight Returns, and Watchmen was also around that time. And so people who didn't usually read comics were now aware of superheroes in a way that they hadn't been. And the 90s kind of ran with it. Now, here's the problem. I mentioned the paper drives and I mentioned the lack of the direct market. When you get to the 90s, you have an entire industry that is built around getting comic books to people. So whoever said, I want this comic, they ordered that, and that's how many they printed. So there is no scarcity, and scarcity is what you need for collector's items to actually be worth something.
I mean, I think that's a problem we still have today. It's like, get this collectible item by ordering right now or whatever, limited print, but you can just order it, right?
Right. And in this case, there was like a veil there because comic book shops were just happy to have new business, right? They weren't pulling a scam, but they didn't, and it took a while, honestly. It took a minute for kind of us collectively to realize what was happening in the wider world, why people were coming in. We thought it was because they wanted to read superheroes, and it took us a minute to figure out that it was speculation. You've got the death of Superman at this time, which just happened to hit on a slow news day.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it just became this wild bonanza of buying comics. And in the middle of that, Denny O'Neil decides to prove a point about what he fundamentally thinks about Batman. And while that point gets proven with Azrael, it starts with Bane.
So to remind listeners, to bring it back, to your point, Bane was designed specifically as more or less a device to kick off, in this event, to kick off the launching of a new Batman or Azrael as Batman.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, it can be done worse than this because Bane is actually a good example of this, and it's probably why they decided to use him on BTAS. He is actually a really good concept in and of himself. If you want to see a bad example of this, go across the street to the Superman books, where they created Doomsday, which is just a big, stupid monster to beat Superman to death. Now, in defense of those people, they never expected that to become what it became. It was a slow news day. It caught newscasters by surprise, and then it caught the public by surprise. So nobody who was doing this for Superman expected it to become like they were doing an event, but they weren't expecting it to take off like that. This storyline comes shortly enough after that they could learn from that mistake. And plus, Denny O'Neil's a bit of a craftsman, so he was like, you give me a good character that can actually pull this off. This is the Batman we're talking about. Right?
Okay, yeah.
And so you get a character that can kind of carry that weight. And I think he does 85% carry that weight in this episode. Would you agree?
Oh, no, I think absolutely. I think Bane is an excellent character. And that's what I say, going back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, he is formidable. He's not Doomsday. I like that you draw that comparison to Doomsday, who feels like an extremely lazy character designed for his sole purpose. And Doomsday, despite this, has somehow survived as a character who keeps coming back, even though he's still as boring as he's ever been. Bane, on the other hand, has taken on almost iconic status. Maybe he's not the Joker or Two-Face, but he's right there. He's right there. I mean, he's appeared in so many other forms of Batman media. I mean, of course, we've got him. Unfortunately for him, he appeared in...
I know where you're going.
Unfortunately for him, doing his reputation in comic book appearance no favors. He appears as a big dum-dum in Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. Of course, as you already mentioned, he does appear again in film in 2012 as Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Rises. I mean, he's featured in 2 of the Arkham games. And I'm not exaggerating when I say he appears in almost every single Batman television show out there. Almost every single one in some form or another. And in fact, he even makes a cameo or a guest appearance in Superman the Animated Series, the episode Nighttime, where Superman dresses up as Batman. So even in the DCAU, he shows up in the Superman cartoon. So this is a guy who has clearly had a huge impact, has resonated in a way that these other plot device or plot mechanic characters haven't. And I think that's I think to your point, that is a credit to Denny O'Neil for making sure that he got a really compelling character to break the bat.
I mean, because and I think it's really fascinating to realize that Denny expected to be bringing Bruce back, right? So he was like, we have to do this thing, but we can't do it in a way that makes him suck, because we are planning on bringing him back. It can't just be some Johnny-come-lately. It can't just be one of the other rogues getting lucky.
Right.
It's got to be somebody that is made for this purpose. Go figure out, who that guy is.
A new character.
You're not wrong about the iconography and how he's really become a part of the bigger, the people outside of comics know Bane because he's in all of the, even before Dark Knight Rises, even before he was in a Nolan picture, people knew who Bane was because of BTAS, because of these games. He's one of the bosses in Arkham Asylum.
Right.
Wait, is it Arkham Asylum? Or is it
Arkham Asylum. He's one of the bosses. And I think that goes back to just how big and formidable and striking the character design is in general.
Yes.
Both conceptually, I mean, of course, there's multiple art directions, but I even think, and then when we get to the animated series redesign, he looks great in his redesign too. So, I mean, he just inherently, that design, that initial core design of Bane was so strong that, reaching iconic status because every version of Bane just looks intimidating and communicates the feeling you should have when staring Bane in the face.
Yeah. I mean, and for my last little bit of comic book nonsense, this continues literally until the present right now as we speak, because Tom King is writing a somewhat controversial but long-running Batman story now that has been going on for a couple of years that kicked off with Bane.
Oh, interesting.
Batman invades Santa Prisca. Oh my gosh, we were just talking about how my son and I are doing a rewatch of Young Justice. Bane and Venom are very important to the first season of Young Justice.
Yep.
He's everywhere, and you'd be hard-pressed to find more recently created Batman villains that have that kind of exposure. By the way, this is where I have to recant something that I said. When we did the ventriloquist episode, I said that I thought he was the most recent villain to make the translation from comic books to BTAS, and I was wrong because Bane beats him by about 10 years, 10, 11 years.
Yeah, okay, yeah, from the 80s to the 90s. Well, no, I think that's a great point. Bane is compared to the Rogues Gallery that we've talked about on almost every episode of the show, he's extremely recent. I mean, the 90s is, I guess now we're getting close to 30 years out, but it looks like compared to the Joker going all the way back to the origins or Two-Face.
1940.
Yes.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, I'm not saying there isn't somebody else, but I mean, for BTAS, I think this is it. 1993 is it, because that is almost concurrent. His comic book appearances are very nearly concurrent with his appearances on the show.
Well, Batman the Animated Series started before Bane was a character.
Yes.
Because it debuted in 1992, and if Bane didn't debut until 93, that means this show was already rolling. So the fact that they were able to bring such a new character straight into the fold, I think, is a real testament to, again, the creative team at Batman the Animated Series, and that they didn't just phone it in. Because, they could have just phoned it in and said, okay, the big luchador guy, he's new, I guess he's selling some comics, let's bring him in. No, they actually did their homework and made sure that they understood what it was about this character that made him so intimidating and interesting.
Because he's got a plan, right? I mean, I really hate when Robin is treated as the boy hostage, but at the same time, it makes a certain amount of sense for Bane's plan here. And I think it's worth saying, Robin holds his own for a shocking amount of time with Bane.
Oh, yeah.
Before Bane gets the better of him.
Right.
Yeah, he's got so Bane has a plan. He not only has a plan for Batman, he has a plan for what happens after Batman, because I don't think he's getting femme fatale by Candace.
Oh, no. I think
she just offered him an opportunity that he hadn't seen coming, and he was like, all right, yeah, let's do it.
I think he's definitely approaching this as a business venture, and I think Candace is kind of like a bonus, for him.
Right.
And she does present a great opportunity that he hadn't considered, but he's willing to go with it. And, if he winds up with Candace on the side, I guess good for him. I don't think he was ever that actually invested in that.
I don't think he's invested in Candace at all, like romantically or personally, but she knows where all of Thorne's skeletons are buried, like all of them. Mm-hmm. She's the key to his empire. I mean, Bane could kill Rupert Thorne the first time that he sees him, but that's not going to put Bane in charge. Candace is what puts Bane in charge because she knows where the books are and where the cooked books are and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I like that he's got a plan for Batman. He's got a plan for after Batman. Where it, for me, falls apart, where that 15% that it falls apart, is that we can't let him actually break Batman.
Yeah, it feels... Because, they can't. And we knew going into this episode that they couldn't do that. I mean, we've got more Batman, the animated series to talk about. So obviously he's not going to be paralyzed for a few episodes.
And this isn't a show that does continuity in a way that would let us do Nightfall.
Right.
It just isn't,
I mean, at most we get like a 2, maybe a 3-parter, maybe. I think they've only seen 2-parters, really. So, I mean, yeah, that just wouldn't fly on the way this show, Batman the Animated Series, is formatted.
I mean, we haven't introduced Azrael. It doesn't make sense for Dick to step up. Yeah, you just kind of... I don't know about going in, but I mean, the thing that makes Bane so terrifying is that he actually beat Batman once, like almost took out Bruce Wayne as the Batman. He made his bones, right?
And that didn't get.
And we're never going to get to do that here.
No,
we're never going to get it.
Not even close. Not even close. I thought you were going to say in the 15% that didn't work for you was the part where Batman basically Googled Project Gilgamesh on his Bat computer to find that perfect recording of Bane's origin story. I thought that was where the 15% might fall in there, for at least.
It's very convenient, okay, but we are talking about Batman here. So and plus, if we really wanted to backfill it, this is post Ra's al Ghul. Perhaps he is taking a more global approach to his war on crime.
Oh, sure. Sure. No,
it is very convenient, though. You are not wrong.
No. It's just a fun thing. It's like he basically Google. I mean, there was no Google at the time, but he just types into his computer's like Project Gilgamesh.
Asked Jeeves.
Yeah. Yes, in the early 90s, I mean, I guess Jeeves is his butler, so hey. I think, Joshua, to your point, I think that's the problem with Bane in the DC, the animated universe, is you never actually get to see Bane break Batman. There's no way that can happen. They get really close in an episode we'll talk about in the future once we get to the redesign where they do Over the Edge, where you do see Bane not break Batman, the iconic like break his back over his knee, but they do have a confrontation in which Bane gets the upper hand. That's pretty dark. But I mean, that's about as close as we get, I think, in the DCAU. And because of that, it does kind of rob this episode of some of the suspense I think we'd have otherwise. Because imagine if this happened today, where Bane showed up, you're like, whoa, Bane's here. Wait, is this gonna is Batman gonna be out for half a season? You know, it's just a different world today.
And then aside from the fact that Bane just isn't going to be allowed to go the distance by the format of BTAS, there's a couple of other things that kind of go to pieces for me. Robin winds up fighting Candace.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And loses, I guess.
It's not 1-to-1, man. Apparently she's trained very hard in her gym.
She kicks her heels off and jumps into the water because he crooks his finger. I know that we needed to have something for them to do, but remember the last time that we needed Candace to have something to do and she wound up fighting Grace and Grace was like dragging her around by her hair?
Yeah.
That makes sense. That is excellent. But this just like, again, I don't love Boy Hostage, even though it makes sense here. But then for Robin to wind up fighting Candace was just like, okay.
Yeah, it felt kind of silly, honestly. And they were trying to create some suspense where there just weren't any.
Yeah, there's so much gravitas that just gets murdered by that kind of stuff, So yeah, that's where for me. We know he's not going to go the distance, and then there's all this weird stuff with Robin and Candace. But really, the rest of this episode is very good. Very good.
I think overall, this is definitely a must-recommend episode. I mean, it's an essential viewing, I would say. I mean, if it might be the only Bane episode you watch. I mean, and there really aren't that many Bane episodes to speak of.
Yeah.
But I think...
Oh, no, you're going to watch the other one because the one with Superman is great, but we're not talking about that right now.
Not right now. Right now. That one's fantastic. Maybe one of the best of Superman the Animated Series. But, Joshua, I guess that's my question to you is, do you think this is an essential watch for fans of Batman the Animated Series?
I'm going to say yes from a historical perspective. But that's basically, like, it's a good episode, but it's not great, is my opinion. But Bane holds a certain place in Batman's Rogues Gallery, right? And it's a place that was being cemented literally as this show aired. And he is going to show up a couple more times, and he is so omnipresent after this point that I'm going to say it's an essential watch, but more from a history than the merits of the episode itself. What would you say?
I think that's fair. I don't think this is outstanding. I just think it's pretty good. And I think it's pretty good because the characterization of Bane is so strong. And I do like how there's a little bit of tension between him and Rupert Thorne and Candace. That's good fun.
Oh, that could have been a whole episode on its own, right?
Exactly. Because I thought that was actually one of the stronger plot elements. But it was rushed, and overall, I think it's a good episode. Not great, because again, like you said, I think it falls apart in the third act to a certain degree. But yeah, if you like Bane, this is a must watch. And I've also got to say, the way his eyeballs start popping out of his head once that venom is his body's being overloaded.
Oh, that scene was fantastic.
Ooh,
yeah,
I was feeling that. I was a little disturbed. It was very effective.
Am I showing my age if I compare that to a Ren and Stimpy cartoon?
I actually just thought about that.
But in a good way.
Yes.
Like in a good way.
Yes.
Not in a goofy way, like in a terrifying way. In the way that kind of made me not love Ren and Stimpy when I was the right age.
Oh, man. Well, it's just so shocking because it looks like it's out of Ren and Stimpy, but it's in Batman the Animated Series, which is a lot more grounded in its approach to animation.
And usually a lot simpler.
Yes.
I mean, we're not going to see veins pop on anybody except for Bane,
Exactly.
So yeah, that level of detail just made it particularly horrifying. So, and there's some other stuff where Bane's moves are all wrestler moves, like there's some good stuff here, but yeah, I just think it falls short of must watch.
Well, Joshua, as always, I like to close out the show with some alternate media recommendations. I've already thrown out a bonus one with Los Luchadores. Do you have my other one is just going to be just for fun. I was actually having a really hard time coming up with some strong recommendations for this because I'm not very well versed in this luchador genre you speak of. And so I'm just throwing Nacho Libre starring Jack Black out there because I really liked it when I was much younger. So that's not a strong recommendation. That's just me struggling, grasping at straws to find something to recommend. How about you?
So I did not recommend a luchador film because, again, I'm not an expert. But if you're unfamiliar, if what we're saying sounds ludicrous, go look for some El Santo movies. You will not be disappointed, even if none of them are actually subtitled and you're not sure what they're saying. My alternate media recommendation is Rocky IV.
Oh, man, going all the way back to the Cold War era. All right, I'm digging it. You know, they actually just made a sequel to this, right?
Yes, they did.
They did.
That's amazing.
Right.
But, so I cannot necessarily, that one may not work quite as well, right? But going back to Rocky IV, you're dealing with a impressive physical specimen in your protagonist, right? Only then the antagonist shows up and just overshadows him entirely, has an accent, and does say that he will break him.
Wow. I never thought about it, but those are some striking parallels. Are we sure that they weren't looking at Rocky IV when they wrote Bane?
Maybe. I mean, who knows the alchemy of creating characters, right? Who knows? But I feel like probably not. The themes are super different, but it is really interesting to see that contrast. And, if the only thing that Drago contributed to Bane was the idea of literally breaking your opponent, that would be more than enough. Like that's a huge piece of Bane. So that's my suggestion. Rocky IV.
Rocky IV, check it out. That is some good 80s-tastic fun, Cold War era propaganda, but it's still loads of fun. And also, they made a sequel to it, Creed 2, which is also a sequel to Creed 1, but it's also a sequel to Rocky IV specifically. So yeah, check it out.
That's some both comic book and luchador level continuity right there. So there's another reason to recommend it on this show. Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, Joshua, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, video games, and all sorts of other pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief and film critic at the Cinematropolis, and we publish these in-depth essays on all types of different films, oftentimes including science fiction and superhero films, all the stuff you'd want to read about. And you can find all of these articles at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough at Joshua Unruh. And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/Pulp Diction Productions.
Join us in our next animated discussion when we talk about Season 2, Episode 11, Baby Doll.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bad time, same bad channel.